Hello and welcome to Unacademy IAS English, a one stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So, let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 10 important articles for a detailed and comprehensive analysis. The idea is to ensure that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. If you guys are benefiting from our initiative, do support us with your likes and comments. Share the video with other aspirants and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Now, before we start, I have a very important announcement. Unacademy is providing a flat 60% off on our IAS courses, and this is a limited time offer. This offer ends tomorrow, and it will also give you a free extension of up to 12 months. This program will give you access to all our online and recorded classes, along with the study material, the mentorship sessions, and doubt resolution sessions, and as well as the prelims and mains test series. So, to avail this special offer, all you have to do is enter the code IAS English on the subscription page. The moment you enter the code IAS English, you will be able to avail the flat 60% off along with a 12-month free extension. So those interested, click on the link provided in the video description below. With this, let's get started. And please ensure you join my Telegram channel by scanning the QR code, because after the session ends, I'll be sharing the PDF of this class on my Telegram channel. So let's look at the first article from page number 10. This important column is written by Ashok Lavasa, a former election commissioner to the Election Commission of India. In this article, he is talking about the controversial topic of delimitation. In fact, we have explored the issue of delimitation several times in previous classes. Given the controversy surrounding the proposed delimitation exercise and the arguments raised by the southern states in particular, especially the state of Tamil Nadu, which has even called for a freeze on the delimitation exercise, has generated a national debate. So, we have held many discussions on this sensitive topic. We have seen both for and against arguments. But today's article is more insightful, more detailed, and actually provides a fresh perspective because it is written by a former election commissioner. So let's dive a little deep into this article and understand what Ashok Lavasa is talking about with regard to delimitation. Now, those of you who don't know what is delimitation, let me just give you a basic introduction and then quickly we will look at the article. Delimitation is a constitutional mandate under Article 82 and 170 of the Indian Constitution. As per the provisions, delimitation exercise, which is carried out by a delimitation commission established by the parliament, it essentially draws up the territorial boundaries of the electoral constituencies in the country. Delimitation is an exercise which ensures proportional representation based on population. Population is used as the primary criteria to draw up the boundaries of electoral constituencies for both Lok Sabha elections and as well as the assembly elections. So, this drawing up of the boundaries of electoral constituencies essentially helps in preserving the principle of one vote, one value. Now, this is the very basis of free and fair democratic elections. Ensuring that each vote has equal value is very essential to ensure the free and fair conduct of a democratic election. So, through delimitation, as the electoral constituencies are drawn up for Lok Sabha and assembly elections, it provides for the principle of proportional representation. It ensures that the citizens of the country, the electors, the voters, have adequate representation in the parliament to represent them. As you know, Lok Sabha and the state assemblies, they are law-making bodies. They perform critical legislative function. The laws passed by these bodies will essentially have an impact on the voters eventually. So voters deserve that proportional representation, and delimitation is the exercise through which a population based drawing up of electoral boundaries is done. And this is carried out based on the population data of the previous census exercise. So, post independence from 1951-52 till 1971, based on the decennial census exercise, delimitation exercises were carried out. But through the 42nd Amendment Act of 1976, delimitation was basically fixed to the data of 1971 census. Any further change in the Lok Sabha seats was frozen until the year 2025 in order to allow for population stabilization to be achieved. To focus on population stabilization and to ensure that states which control and reduce their population are not penalized, delimitation was fixed as per the population data reflected in the 1971 census. So, this ensured that states which performed well with regard to population control, which brought down their fertility rate, they were not penalized by any reduction in the Lok Sabha seats. So, now the debate has emerged again. Given that the last census has been delayed by the Modi government, there is anticipation that the census might be conducted after 2025, maybe by next year, which means, as per the constitutional amendments which were done to freeze the census data for delimitation, the census which will be conducted after 2025 will become the basis for the next delimitation exercise. So let's say there is a census exercise carried out by 2026. That census data, that population data will become the basis for the next delimitation exercise. Now, this is where the concern has been raised by certain states, especially southern states, which have performed much better with regard to administration, governance, and as well as with regard to population control. Now, they fear that they might be penalized. They might lose out on their seats if population is used as the sole criteria, because they have managed to control their population through better implementation of the family planning programs, which was pushed by the central government itself. Whereas other states such as UP, Bihar, etc., they could end up with a larger share of the seats in the parliament because they failed to control population. In a way, they could be rewarded for failure in governance and administration. This eventually will end up playing a role in determining the devolution of funds as well, to an extent, as the Finance Commission, which is another constitutional body that determines the devolution of funds. It uses population as one of the criteria to determine the devolution of funds. So, on these grounds, states like Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Kerala, and others are demanding a freeze on delimitation, or they want certain guarantees from the central government that their seat share in the parliament will not go down significantly. And at the same time, they want to ensure that their economic, political, and financial interests are secured and protected. So, this is where the writer has a different viewpoint. Ashok Lavasa argues that, see, delimitation is constitutionally mandated. You can't cite these excuses, these reasons to delay or freeze delimitation itself. The writer does acknowledge the genuine concerns, the fears of the state governments, especially the southern states, but he points out and argues very strongly that delimitation need not be to the disadvantage of those states which have performed better with regard to population control, because there are solutions available. There are ways to work around these problems and challenges only if both the sides are reasonable and rational. See, for example, if you hear our politicians, they have been whipping up fear on one side. For example, we had Chandrababu Naidu calling upon people to have more children. He even urged people to have up to 10, 12 children. These political messages which are being sent out are ludicrous. It has absolutely no basis. It makes no sense. Similarly, on the other side, especially from the central government, from the leaders of UP and Bihar, there are equally controversial statements which are coming out. So politicians are busy exploiting this issue, but the writer says that while protecting the feature of federalism, we can still ensure proportional representation on the basis of population without affecting certain states which have controlled and reduced their population. He says a constitutionally mandated exercise cannot be held hostage for political brownie points. So let's see what is the idea that Ashok Lavasa is suggesting and proposing. See, delimitation is essential to ensure the principle of population proportionality, to ensure that roughly each electoral constituency has the same population as much as possible. But please understand, such a mathematical approach, just by using population as a criteria, of course, is never suitable. Because today, the population numbers have changed drastically. But if you look at the past, if you look at the data from previous delimitation exercises, there have been instances where states have gained seats, some states have lost few seats as well. In fact, the writer goes into those details, which I don't think is relevant for the exam, but the writer does provide data to point out which states gained more seats, which states lost a few seats. Because between 1951 and 1970s, through subsequent delimitation based on the previous census data, changes happened with regard to the seats allotted to different states in the parliament. Some states lost out and some states gained more seats as well. That's how eventually we ended up with 543 seats in the Lok Sabha. In 1951-52, there were hardly around 480 Lok Sabha seats, which increased to 543. So despite the changes, it was never politicized in the past. But of course, we have seen a larger population increase, almost an exponential increase post 1970s, where some states especially have grown at a much faster rate, whereas few other states have managed to control their population growth. But the writer says that there are ways to work around this. There are ways in which you can protect the states that have controlled population and still ensure that delimitation is still carried out. So the writer is arguing that there are three important basis points which have to be considered for any delimitation exercise. The writer says the principle of population, of course, cannot be done away with. Population will have to remain a criteria. This is what ensures the guarantee of universal adult franchise. When population is used, it's a simple criteria to draw up the electoral boundaries and ensure the principle of one vote, one value. But please understand that in the past and even currently, there are constituencies with differing population size, with differing number of electors. That does not diminish the representation of that constituency. That does not diminish the value of that MP or MLA who's representing that set of voters in the Lok Sabha or in the assembly. That is the key point that the writer is trying to make. States might lose out on some seats, few states might gain some seats, but this eventually will not affect the representation for the voters. Because the writer is pointing out that in the past as well, during delimitation exercises, some states have lost few seats, some states have gained seats. That is how it works when population is used as a criteria, as population is the right criteria to be used. But to correct for the imbalance, to address the concerns and fears, there are ways in which we can work around that and ensure a fair treatment for everyone. Now, the writer says we need to consider the impact of public policy as well. Family planning control was a public policy pushed by the central government. Controlling population was a policy pushed by the central government, which was successfully implemented by some states. So you can't penalize them just because they succeeded in implementing the program and they ensured that they achieved the goals of population control. And you can't end up awarding those states in an unfair manner which failed at population control. So this criteria has to be kept in mind while using population as a principle for delimitation. Along with that, we need to ensure overall representativeness. There has to be proportional, fair, equitable representation, ensure that voters get their voice represented in the parliament. So how can we do this? How can we go ahead with delimitation and keep the controversy aside and still use population as a criteria while treating all states as fairly as possible? The writer points out that it's largely a misconception that delimitation provides for constituencies with roughly the same population. Generally, we have always discussed that roughly each constituency has around 10 lakh or 1 million voters. While this has been the thumb rule for the last few decades, if you look at the ground level data, there are instances, there are cases where certain constituencies have a much significantly lesser voter base, whereas there are constituencies which have a much higher population. So this has not really affected the representativeness of that constituency. See, on an average, if you look at 2024 election data and the way in which electoral constituencies were organized, On an average, each constituency has around 1.8 million voters. 18 lakh is roughly the population on an average for each constituency. But if you look at a constituency like Lakshadweep, the population is just 57,000 electors. Now compare this with a constituency such as Malkajgiri, which has a close to 3 million voter population. So, can you say that the value of MP from Lakshadweep is in any way lesser than the value of the MP from this constituency? The answer is no. Both the MPs have the same rights, the same privileges in the parliament. They represent their voters eventually. See, we don't deal with our MPs on a day to day basis. We don't go to our MPs raising our day to day problems. Population might differ from constituency to constituency, despite the best efforts of the Delimitation Commission to roughly ensure the approximate same population in each constituency. The actual population will differ in some constituencies. Some constituencies will have very less population. Some constituencies might have much higher population than the average. This in no way diminishes the representativeness of that constituency. Each constituency will eventually have its representation. The MPs from each constituency will have the same rights, the same privileges in the parliament. They will have the same powers in the parliament, be it gaining membership of a parliamentary committee, right? The MPs will have the same right. Their voting rights will not go down. Their ability to raise questions, to hold the government accountable, will not diminish or reduce just because they're representing a larger constituency or a smaller constituency. So, if you look at this from the national perspective, by ignoring the regional political differences which have been raised, the writer actually makes sense. The writer is correctly pointing out that there are constituencies with differing population size, and this in no way diminishes the value of a constituency or the value of a MP. The same logic will apply for assemblies as well. Assembly seats have increased over the decades, but eventually the population they represent, whether the size is large or small, doesn't really matter because each representative, each MP, each MLA will end up having the same rights and privileges in the House. They can still raise the voice of their constituents and they can still represent their constituency. So when that is the case, what is the point? What is the point about fighting, bickering over the number of seats? Because in the past, when seats reduced or increased for certain states, we did not see such divisiveness, we did not see such level of politicization which we are witnessing now. The writer even says that delimitation by using population will ensure one vote, one value. It will preserve universal adult franchise in the easiest, simplest manner possible, and to provide better governance at the grassroots, to provide better representation at the grassroots level, we need to step up allocation to the Finance Commission. The Finance Commission can make tweaks to ensure that better devolution of funds is provided based on population criteria. At the same time, grassroots democracy can be strengthened through local governance, that is essentially through Panchayati Raj institutions and municipal bodies. The third tier of governance is what actually plays a role in our day to day lives. We don't run to our MPs with problems related to roads or water supply or with sewage management. This is something that is handled at the grassroots level by your local bodies, by the grassroots level institutions. Now, if these institutions are reformed and strengthened, and eventually delimitation, irrespective of the size of the constituency or irrespective of the number of seats a state gets, that shouldn't really matter as long as people are getting their basic rights, their basic demands fulfilled. Local governance plays a much critical role, and this in no way diminishes your representation through your MP, through your MLA in the state assembly or in the Lok Sabha. So that is the basic point the writer is trying to make. In first past the post system, which we follow, the numerical strength of a constituency is actually immaterial. The writer is absolutely right. Whether a constituency has 50,000 population or a constituency has 3 million population, that doesn't really matter. Eventually, your MP, your MLA is your representative. They have the same right, the same voice, the same power in the House. The writer says strengthening local bodies of governance, the third tier of governance, will actually help in ensuring better governance at the grassroots level. The writer even says we should use a deflator to account for population changes, to account for the population difference. He acknowledges the fear and concern raised by southern states. He's not dismissing them. He's criticizing the politicization by both the central government and the state governments. But the writer says that we can address the issue of population imbalance between southern states and few other highly populated states by using a deflator, where you can moderate the impact of the population imbalance between states. Using total fertility rate at the state level as a criteria for which data is accurately available, we can ensure that a deflator is used to bring down the impact of larger population on the number of seats. Now, as per projections, if we were to go by the criteria that each constituency will roughly have 10 lakh voters, and if a new delimitation is done based on the next census which will be conducted, states like UP, Bihar will see a big jump in the number of seats. States like Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Kerala might see a reduction as well, or a very small marginal increase. So, to address the imbalance and to ensure fairness is provided for, we need to account for the impact of the policy, the central government policy on population control. That's why the writer says the southern states have a valid point. Why should they be penalized? Why should they lose seats and representation just because they perform better with regard to population control? To address this concern, a deflator can be used. Experts can devise, experts who will be part of the delimitation commission can come up with a deflator which can moderate the population imbalance by using total fertility rate as a criteria. So that way, states which have reduced and controlled their population can be rewarded. States with better TFR can be rewarded, whereas states with higher population can be penalized. In fact, this is what UPSC does with regard to mains evaluation for optional subjects. You might have heard UPSC uses a normalization technique because, see, by virtue of the very nature of optional subjects, some subjects might be more tougher, some subjects might be easier, some subjects are easier to score, some are more difficult to score. So, to ensure fairness at a level playing field in the mains exam, I'm sure you know that UPSC uses a deflator, which is nothing but the normalization technique. The same concept can be applied. It's a mathematical exercise which can be applied by using the TFR of every state, the total fertility rate. States which have reduced TFR can be rewarded. States which have increased population or not controlled population can be penalized by using the deflator. And that will ensure a level of fairness and provides a level playing field for everyone. That is what the writer is pointing out. You can't hold delimitation hostage because of the politicization. You can't prevent or stop the exercise itself. It's a constitutional mandate, it has to be carried out. But there are ways of addressing the concerns which are genuine concerns. You need to strengthen grassroots democracy. You need to use a deflator, ensure better allocation of funds. If this is taken care of, then there is no reason why delimitation can't be carried out by using population as a criteria. So let me know what you think in the comments on this controversial issue, and please take up this practice question for your answer writing practice. Now, before we proceed to the next article, I have another important announcement. On April 13th, Unacademy is conducting one of India's biggest scholarship test, the UCSC, the Civil Services Championship Test. This gives you an opportunity to attempt full-length mock papers for both general studies and CSAT at 11 a.m. and 5 p.m. And students who perform well, they stand a chance to win up to 100% scholarship on our IAS courses. And not only that, you also have a chance to win exciting rewards from IPL box tickets to very attractive gadgets. So those interested, please register immediately using the link provided in the video description below. Now let's look at the next article. On the same page, we have another important column related to the topic of social security. Social security, particularly for the gig industry, the gig workers. So let's quickly understand this article and break down the arguments of the author, and we will look beyond the article as well. I'll try to bring in some points and arguments from other related sources, including the Indian Express and other well acknowledged sources, which can actually give you more detailed insights into this topic. The topic is very relevant for economy and even for social justice. So first, let's understand what is social security and who are gig workers. The gig workers are those who work in the new emerging tech-enabled industry. All the delivery apps which have emerged, the food delivery apps or the rider hailing platforms, the cab aggregators, for example, they employ a number of delivery executives, drivers, then those who handle the back end logistics, etc. They fall under this bracket called gig workers. They are treated separately because they don't fall under the traditional employee employer relationship. See, in the formal economy, right, when you work for an organization, be it a factory, be it a company, right, be it in the manufacturing sector or in the services sector, there is a traditional employee employer relationship where you're formally recruited by a company, you're on the payroll of the company, you receive certain benefits as part of the remuneration which is provided to you. So those in the formal industry, they often work for one employee. You can't go and work for two, three different companies. If you're a software engineer, you work for one IT company. If you're a, let's say, a factory worker, you work for one particular factory. So the traditional model of employee-employee relationship provides for easy transfer of not just the salaries, but also the social security that comes with your job. Social security will cover insurance, pension, and other benefits which are offered by your employers, right? But in the gig industry, in the new tech enabled industry which has emerged, the same worker might be working with different platforms. For example, a food delivery executive might be working with one platform and might be working with another platform as well. A cab driver might be driving the cab for different cab aggregators. So there could be multiple employers for the same employee. So in that case, how will the social security be provided? With regard to salary, there is no problem because gig workers don't get a regular salary. They are paid as per the job which is carried out. They are incentivized based on the tasks which are performed. So they get direct payments for the tasks which have been done as per the incentive model that the company would have devised. But how will social security be delivered to them when the same delivery executive or cab driver is working for multiple different companies? All the companies have a responsibility to provide insurance, to provide pension and related benefits as part of social security to that employee. So that is why gig workers need special attention. So this is a new industry which has emerged because of new advances in technology. Technology will keep disrupting the economy, creating new branches in the economy, creating out new sectors and disrupting the traditional economy. So new kind of workers will emerge, new kind of industries will emerge, and the government will have to ensure that social security is provided to them. Now, the government has finally come out with a plan to cover gig workers under social security. These gig workers are now being covered under a dedicated central scheme, which is awaiting approval from the cabinet. A dedicated social security scheme has been conceptualized by the central government to cover social security for the gig workers in the gig industry. Now, the writer is examining the benefits of this scheme and also talking about the flaws, the shortcomings of this proposed scheme, which is going to be implemented. The writer is actually offering very good insights about the international standards which are followed, the labor standards, and comparing that with India's model. So I will take you through this discussion and slightly look beyond the article as well. So let's see what kind of benefits are being provided to gig workers in the upcoming social security scheme. Once it is approved by the cabinet and once it takes effect, the gig workers will receive health coverage under Ayushman Bharat, a health insurance for the gig workers. The burden here would be shared partly by the companies which are employing them, along with some support from the government. Registration on the e-Shram portal for accessing various social security schemes that are run by the government. The e-Shram portal enables the government to register the employees, right, even from the informal sector, and bring them under the coverage of various social sector schemes from insurance to pension. Then, transaction based pension policy, where each employer will contribute a significant share for the employees who are working with them. A universal account number will be provided to each worker so that this universal account number will become the single identity for that worker. And once they register their universal account number with their employers, be it Company A, Company B, Company C, all of them will proportionately contribute to the pension fund, which ensures the availability of pension for the gig workers as well. Is that clear? So these are the proposed features of the central scheme, which is awaiting the cabinet approval. So there are definitely some great provisions included in the scheme, because finally India is looking at the concerns of the gig workers and bringing them under the coverage of social security. And this is indeed a big step forward. We need to praise and appreciate the government as well for taking the effort. And once the scheme becomes operational, it will provide the basic minimum social security for gig workers. But however, there are some drawbacks, there are some shortcomings which need to be taken care of. See, at the global level, labor standards are laid down through ILO conventions. ILO is the International Labor Organization, also part of the UN system, and India happens to be a founding member of ILO. India is one of the countries which played a role in the establishment of the International Labor Organization. The ILO brings out these labor conventions. For social security, there is a convention, convention number 102, that prescribes the minimum standards for social security. This was adopted in 1952, but India has not ratified this convention. Though we are a founding member of ILO, we have not ratified convention number 102, even though it has been more than 70 years since it was adopted by International Labor Organization. So this is one of the drawbacks. We are not implementing those ILO standards when it comes to social security. This ILO convention prescribes the minimum standards to be followed, and India is not a part of this. So the scheme which has been designed and the overall social security which is being delivered to those in informal industry or to the gig workers is simply not enough. It doesn't match up to the global minimum standards. See, India has recently brought out four new labor codes, simplify the labor laws. And one of the labor code deals with social security. The social security code doesn't completely align with ILO Convention 102. So, if you look at the provisions of the social security code, if you look at the definitions, the overall social security protection, it appears that India has watered down, diluted the protection given to workers in the informal industry, as we are not signatory to Convention 102 of ILO. We are not following the global minimum standards. There has been a lot of criticism against the Social Security Code, which is one of the new labor codes, with regard to the vague and ambiguous definitions which have been given, with regard to the watered down and diluted provisions. So critics are pointing out these shortcomings. They're also pointing out the flaw in the implementation plan which has been proposed by the government. For the new central policy for social security for gig workers, the implementation will be carried out through welfare boards. At the state level, the social welfare domain, there are welfare boards representing different industries, different sectors. For example, there will be a welfare board for construction workers, a welfare board for BD cigarette workers, a welfare board for street vendors. These welfare boards are responsible under the proposed new policy to implement the social security provisions. Now, this is a flawed approach according to the writer, because instances around the country shows that welfare boards have failed miserably. A CAG audit has shown that a welfare board in Tamil Nadu failed to deliver on social security commitments to the workers in that particular sector. Studies and surveys have repeatedly shown that welfare boards at the state level are failing miserably to utilize the funds which are allocated to them. They have a lot of unspent, unused funds lying with them. They're not dispersing the funds to deserving workers. And there's also a lot of politicization of these welfare boards. Appointments to the welfare boards are done largely on political grounds. So there's a lot of corruption also which is present in these welfare boards. So vesting the responsibility of implementing the new policy in the hands of the welfare board is going to be controversial. But the question is, why is the government relying on welfare boards? See, there is a logic to this. Welfare boards actually have a reach to different sectors of the economy. As I said, each sector, each industry has its own welfare board. There will be a coffee welfare board, a tea industry welfare board. These welfare boards can actually target the workers in the industry and ensure that the workers in that particular sector are benefited. So there is a certain advantage to rely on the welfare boards to implement these labor welfare programs and social security programs. That's why the government has historically relied upon these welfare boards. But the problem is they are not efficient. And also, tomorrow the economy will change. Technology will again disrupt the economy. There will be new sectors which will open up. A new brand of workers will come up. So each time, if you're thinking about creating a welfare board, coming out with a new policy for social security, then you're defeating the very purpose of social security. See, today, AI is revolutionizing the industry. So new technologies will disrupt the existing industry. There will be new sectors, new disruptive sectors which will come up, a new type of workforce which might come up in the future. How will you take care of their social security if you don't have a universal coverage? Right now, we are following this piecemeal approach. We are having social security for government employees, social security for formal workers, informal workers. Different welfare boards are implementing these plans at the grassroots level. Instead of having such a piecemeal approach, isn't it better to have a universal program? A universal program which will take care of any new emerging industry in the future. Because see, India is preparing for the future of the economy. We are preparing our workforce to become future ready. So don't you think the workforce deserves social security irrespective of the sector they belong to or irrespective of the technological economic changes that happen? So for that, the government should conceptualize a universal social security program, which is accessible, which is fair and equitable, which is effectively, efficiently implemented. So, right now, the government took almost 15 years to come out with a policy for gig workers, and it still hasn't been implemented. The gig industry emerged in early 2000. It's been more than 2 decades, in fact, since the gig industry emerged, and still gig workers don't have social security protection. So each time there is a new industry, each time there is a new technological economic disruption, should the workers wait for the government to come out with a new policy for 15, 20 years? Instead of having this piecemeal approach, it is better to have a universal focus, to provide for a universal approach and have a universal program for social security so that all workers of all kinds from all sectors are covered. Even if there is a new industry which emerges, which a new sector which comes up because of new technology or economic changes, they will still have access to guaranteed social security. So that is what the writer is suggesting. So please take up this practice question and try to practice your answer writing based on what we have discussed. Now let's look at another interesting article. There's an editorial on page number 10 that takes a look at RBI's monetary policy, which we discussed yesterday, the changes that the Monetary Policy Committee has carried out for key policy rates such as the repo rate, and the context in which the changes have been done, the global context in which these monetary policy changes have been brought out by the Monetary Policy Committee. So I'll provide a very quick analysis here. I don't want to go through the entire discussion because we did discuss the same topic yesterday as well. The RBI's Monetary Policy Committee has reduced the repo rate by 25 basis points. Repo rate is the rate at which RBI lends to commercial banks. It's the key benchmark policy rate. So if repo rate is brought down, what will happen? It will basically reduce your interest rates on your loans. Be it your home loan, auto loan, commercial loans, the interest rates will go down because commercial banks will pass down the rate cut to the customers. So if this reduces, if the interest rate goes down, it essentially increases the appetite for borrowing. It will help in introducing liquidity into the market. Now, commercial banks can borrow at a lower rate from the RBI. So they can borrow more from the RBI, lend out more loans to customers, to both retail and the commercial borrowers, and thus bring more liquidity into the market, which will create new investments and create fresh demand and trigger economic activity. So reduction in repo rate essentially infuses more liquidity. Now, this is a clear sign that Monetary Policy Committee is being more accommodative. Until recently, it had adopted a neutral stance when it comes to a reduction of repo rate. Because if repo rates are increased, it will have the opposite impact. It will suck out the liquidity, which is usually done to control inflation. Excess liquidity would have caused inflation. So to curb inflationary tendencies, repo rate is often increased. The Monetary Policy Committee had adopted a neutral stance on this, maintaining this delicate balance between promoting growth and controlling inflation. But now, the very fact that the policy has turned accommodative, Monetary Policy Committee has made it clear that they are shifting their stance from neutral to accommodative, and they've reduced repo rate twice. And there is a clear sign that in the coming reviews as well, there will be further reduction, which means that the RBI is looking to provide a stimulus for growth. It's looking to bring in a fresh stimulus for growth by increasing liquidity. So, why is it doing this? It is very clear that RBI is worried about the global economic context. So, what's happening in the global economy right now? Tariff wars unleashed by United States, unleashed by President Donald Trump. The tariff wars are disrupting global supply chains in the global economy, and it might hurt India's exports. It could even hurt India's domestic demand. There are many domestic weaknesses in the Indian economy. Plus, the global uncertainties is adding to the challenges. The ongoing conflicts, which have disrupted the global economy from last 3 years, continue to have their impact. So, all these global uncertainties is creating a very uncertain economic environment. Because to focus on economic growth, you need a stable policy environment. But on the other hand, you have Donald Trump announcing tariffs every other day and reversing the tariffs, pausing the tariffs. So, this uncertainty, this chaos which Trump has unleashed, has plunged the stock markets. And this is something that worries investors. This is something that worries the manufacturing industry. In fact, India's export industry has already urged the government to fast track the trade negotiations with the US to ensure India US have a trade deal by the middle of this year so that India at least can be insulated from the impact of the tariff wars unleashed by the US. As we discussed yesterday, for now, Donald Trump has paused the tariffs on all the countries except for China. But a minimum 10% tariff will apply. The 10% baseline tariff will apply for all the countries from the US. This itself can become a trade barrier. And apart from that, US is right now targeting China. The tariffs have already hit 145%, according to latest reports against China. And China has retaliated with reciprocal tariffs. So this trade war between US and China is causing a major disruption, and this could end up hurting India's economic interests. Because India depends on global supply chains. India has critical exports headed towards US and other key markets, which could be disturbed because of the tariff wars. As countries become more protectionist, as they become more inward looking and come out with such nationalist policies, this could hurt globalization and it could destroy global supply chains forever. And there are lessons in history. In fact, the Great Depression of 1930s was triggered by such protectionist measures which started in the US. In 1930, the Moot-Hawley Act provided for such protectionist tariffs, very similar to what Donald Trump is doing right now. In the name of protecting American agriculture, American manufacturing industry, high tariffs were brought against imported goods and products, thinking that these tariffs will protect American jobs and boost American domestic manufacturing. But eventually, what happened? These trade barriers which were erected, it disrupted the global trade supply chains and actually pushed the US economy and the global economy into a deep recession. Protectionism and economic nationalism has always pushed the global economy downwards. And eventually, during the interwar years between the two world wars, the world went through a Great Depression, which basically was triggered by the US economic policies. So there is a likelihood of this repeating again. So the editorial is urging countries, especially the US, to focus on their own strength. Instead of coming out with such protectionist policies which are designed to hurt another country, it's better to focus on your inherent strength, your competitive strength. For example, the US desperately needs to focus on education, innovation, research. Yes, there is a need to protect American jobs, there is a need to revive American manufacturing, but this can't be done by targeting other countries and hurting the economic interests of others. If US has to do this, if Trump really wants to make America great again, then Trump administration has to invest in American education, rebuild the manufacturing base and attract investors and set up the industries again. You can't coerce and arm twist the world and hope that manufacturing will somehow come back to the US. It can't be done at the cost of hurting others. This Chaos which has been introduced will simply disrupt the global economy. That is the point the editorial is trying to make. The editorial is completely opposed to such trade barriers, which is essentially a zero sum game where countries will target each other with reciprocal tariffs, hurt each other's economic interests. Eventually, every country will start looking inward. They will turn more conservative, more protectionist. They'll start focusing on more economic nationalism, which can be detrimental for global supply chains and global economy. So that is what we learn from here. And please note, there are deeper concerns for India. India's GDP forecast has been reduced from 6.7 to 6.5%. This is despite inflation being very moderate. Inflation has moderated to around 3.6%. Food inflation also has come under control. But despite this, there are serious challenges for growth uh, due to some domestic constraints and also due to the global context. That is why the editorial is urging global leaders, countries to not resort to this conflict, to not enter a trade war and erect trade barriers. Instead, it's urging leaders to focus on their inherent competitive strength and focus on research, education, and build the manufacturing base. Now, let's look at another important update. Now, we move to the update section where we will look at few important articles that gives us updates on key developments which are happening, and then we'll proceed to the prelim section. United States has extradited one of India's wanted terrorists, Tahawwur Rana, who has been alleged to be one of the co-conspirators of the deadly 2611 Mumbai attacks. I'm sure all of you know, in 2008, Pakistan-based terror organization Lashkar-e-Toiba carried out one of the biggest terror attacks against India. So, Tahawwur Rana, who has now been extradited from the US to India, is seen as one of the co-conspirators. Now, I'll not go into the details of the case. It's not really necessary for the exam. But I'll just take you through what has happened, why Tahawwur Rana could be important. But is Rana the most important conspirator? Has US really helped India? That is something we need to look at. See, in the planning and execution of the attack, there was one main conspirator involved known as David Coleman Headley. David Headley was a Pakistani American citizen working as a double agent for US intelligence agencies such as the Drug Enforcement Authority and later the CIA. And while he was working for American intelligence agencies and passing intelligence from Afghanistan and Pakistan on drug cartels and terror groups, he got attracted by the jihadist ideology of groups like Lashkar-e-Toiba and became a key elite operative. So, given his Western American appearance and his American citizenship, he was used by LET to carry out the reconnaissance for the Mumbai attacks. David Headley would enter India multiple times undetected, and he would carry out the detailed reconnaissance of every target of the landing point and provide all the information and the details he had collected to Lashkar-e-Toiba, which helped in planning and executing the attack. Now, the American intelligence agencies knew a lot about David Headley even before the attacks happened. But the US, in a way, betrayed and backstabbed India by not revealing the identity of David Headley for many more months, even after the attack. Now, this individual, David Headley, was helped by one of his childhood friend, and that is none other than Tahawwur Rana. Tahawwur Rana, who has now been extradited, was a childhood friend of David Headley. Tahawwur Rana was a Pakistani uh, citizen at one point. He was in the Pakistani army as an army doctor. Later, he migrated to Canada. Now he has Canadian American citizenship. But clearly, he has Pakistani links. They studied in the same institution, Tahawwur Rana and David, at their educational institution. They shared a mutual hatred towards India that stemmed from the 1971 war. And in a way, Tahawwur Rana helped and enabled David Headley in planning and executing the 2611 Mumbai attacks. So, Tahawwur Rana and Headley were colleagues as well later. Apart from being childhood friends, Headley would often share his involvement with terror groups with Tahawwur Rana, and Tahawwur Rana kept it a secret. It's reported through investigative reports that Headley even revealed the plans of 2611 attacks, and Tahawwur Rana enabled Headley to enter India. Tahawwur Rana had transformed into a immigration consulting lawyer, running a travel consulting firm, and he used his work documents to enable David Headley to get a work visa to India and even allowed David Headley to set up a front office in Mumbai, a immigration consulting firm, And David Headley would use that as a cover, as a front to enter India multiple times. Tahawwur Rana enabled David Headley's entry into India and also concealed information about the 2611 Mumbai attacks. It's also reported through Indian investigation that Tahawwur Rana visited India just a short while before the attacks happened with his family. So there's a lot of mystery surrounding Tahawwur Rana, his visit to India as well, and that is something India would like to uncover. Now, India has already prosecuted, convicted Ajmal Kasab, the sole terrorist who was captured alive and delivered the death penalty as well to Ajmal Kasab. Now, India is pursuing the case with other conspirators, including David Headley and Tahawwur Rana. But David Headley will never be extradited to India, despite India US having an extradition treaty. That's because David Headley entered into a plea bargain with the US authorities, where he agreed to share all the information after he was arrested, which essentially shields him from extradition to another country. But the US backstabbed India by not revealing David Headley to India, by not sharing details, and by not extraditing David Headley to India. How? Because the US authorities did not reveal about David Headley's participation and Tahawwur Rana's participation until late 2009. Even now, 1 year after the attack, David Headley had entered India again. India had no clue about his involvement, and he was still involved in planning attacks. The US moved and arrested David Headley only when Headley was looking to carry out an attack with, again, Rana's help in Europe. They were looking to target a Danish newspaper in Copenhagen, which had published very controversial cartoons about Prophet Muhammad. Only then US intervened and arrested Headley and Rana, then revealing the involvement of these individuals in the 2611 plot. So US never compromised these intelligence assets. It never revealed the full information to India. Maybe, if at all it had been done, maybe there was a slight possibility where 2611 Mumbai attacks might have even been prevented. So this is where many Indian officials, former experts and former officials believe that US betrayed and backstabbed India. Former Union Home Secretary G.K. Pillai was furious about how US had betrayed India, and he has been public about this as well. That till the last minute, till Headley was arrested, India had no idea about him. Even though US had given intelligence before the Mumbai attacks, very specific intelligence had been given that Mumbai will be targeted through the sea route. Five-star hotels could be the target. But US never gave the specific information about Headley and his reconnaissance plans and attempts in Mumbai. That information would have been critical for India to disrupt and prevent the attack itself. So now handing over Rana is like handing over a biscuit to India. But still, it's a big win. It represents the success of India's counter-terror efforts and diplomacy. At least our counter-terror cooperation with US has improved significantly since the Mumbai attacks. And credit should go to our intelligence agencies, our counter-terror agencies like NIA, which have done an incredible job of building a strong case against these conspirators. Now there is still a lot of job left to be done. India will have to use Tahawwur Rana's extradition to the maximum advantage possible. We should not only aim to secure justice for the victims of the Mumbai attacks by securing punishment for Tahawwur Rana, but we should further unravel the mystery and the other unknown details surrounding the attack. Step up interrogation since now we have custody of Rana, and use this to uncover the Pakistani involvement. There has been speculation that Tahawwur Rana may never have ended his involvement and contact with the Pakistani army. Because don't forget, I told you, Tahawwur Rana at one point was a Pakistani army doctor. He might have migrated to Canada and US, might have changed his profession, but you can't deny the possibility that he might have been working for Pakistani deep state, for Pakistani intelligence. So, if further investigation and his trial and prosecution, if it not only secures justice to the victims by punishing Tahawwur Rana, but also if it unravels any new details about the attacks, about what went into the planning, that itself can be a big breakthrough. This can be used by India to put the spotlight on Pakistan and again pressurize Pakistan to crack down on terrorism. But as I said, the real win will be when David Headley will be handed over to India. But it's unlikely to happen. It may never happen, as US intelligence agencies are not going to compromise on their source. As I said, David Headley has entered into a plea bargain which prevents US from extraditing him to India. So this is still a developing story, but that is the update you need on this topic. Next, a lot of controversy has come up with regard to the Digital Personal Data Protection Act. The Digital Personal Data Protection Act, which seeks to protect your personal digital data, it seeks to amend the RTI Act, the Right to Information Act. Now, How are these two connected? See, under RTI Act, you have section number 8. According to section 8 of RTI, any information, any government information which is of public interest should be disclosed to the public. If there is any information which can be disclosed to the parliament, to the state assembly, such information deserves to be placed in the public domain as well in the larger public interest. This could be information related to government schemes, government welfare programs, government spending. This will allow the citizens, the civil society, the media, the activists to maintain accountability, to hold the government accountable. But through the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, the government is seeking to amend the RTI Act, specifically this provision, section 8. So, what is this amendment all about? What does the amendment say? As per this upcoming amendment, on the grounds of data privacy, the government can withhold the release of information under section 8 of RTI by citing the breach of digital privacy and data privacy. Government can indirectly use the Digital Personal Data Protection Act to prevent the disclosure of essential information of public interest under RTI. Let's break this down. For example, let's say there's a government welfare program, a subsidy program. Now, activists believe that some corruption might have happened. They want some information on this scheme. Now, in general times, without the Data Protection Act, under RTI Act, under Section 8, information related to such government schemes should have been made public if there is a RTI request which has been raised. But now the government might cite, it can say that if this amendment goes through, that if this information on the subsidy scheme is released, it might compromise the digital privacy, the data privacy of the government officials and the beneficiaries of the government program. By using that as an excuse, government can withhold information and deny right to information, even when the information is of public interest. That's why opposition parties have raised a huge issue. They have started criticizing the government. They're arguing that government is trying to dilute RTI indirectly, and it's trying to kill the RTI by using the Digital Data Protection Act. In 2017, Supreme Court of India, in the landmark Puttaswamy case, KS Puttaswamy case, delivered a historic judgment. It declared right to privacy, which includes information data privacy, as a fundamental right, which is enshrined under Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. This is what led to the establishment of the Justice B.N. Sri Krishna Committee that recommended the Digital Data Protection Act, based on which we now have the Digital Personal Data Protection Act that was enacted recently. Now, this law being abused to indirectly prevent right to information and carry out an amendment to the RTI is being seen by opposition leaders, by civil society activists as an attempt to kill RTI and to dilute RTI. But the government has a strong defense. Government is defending the move. The government is saying that it is essential to protect privacy as well. In the name of right to information, you can't release all the information which could compromise the data privacy of government officials and the beneficiaries of a government program. The government is saying it will strike a balance between right to information and right to privacy. But however, critics are also arguing that under Section 8, this balance had already been established under RTI. When RTI was drafted and RTI was brought out by the then UPA government under Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, it had accounted for protection of personal information. Information which is private to government officials and beneficiaries of a government program was already protected under Section 8. There was no need to amend it. There was no need to bring in additional privacy protection, which could now become an excuse to block access to information. And this could basically dilute and even weaken the RTI law itself. So, this is the raging debate right now with regard to the proposed amendment of RTI Act, Section 8 specifically, through the Digital Personal Data Protection Act. Next, we have another important update related to Maoism. The Ministry of Home Affairs, along with the Naxal affected states, they have stepped up their fight against Naxals in the last 2 years. I've discussed this in my previous classes as well. The last 15 to 24 months, we have seen a renewed effort by the central government in collaboration with the Naxal affected states to end Naxalism, to eradicate and wipe out Naxalism, which is a type of left wing extremist movement inspired by the communist Maoist ideology. In the last few months, especially, security forces have seen a tremendous success in anti Naxal operations. Several top Naxal leaders have been killed from Chhattisgarh to Maharashtra to Odisha. Several Naxal elements and cadres have been eliminated by security forces in large scale operations which are going on. For example, in the Dandakaranya forest of Chhattisgarh, the Kagar campaign, which is led by the CRPF and the Chhattisgarh State Police, they have seen tremendous success in this anti Maoist operation which has been going on. So, Naxals are weakened as of now compared to the last, let's say, 2 to 3 decades. Naxal movement is at its weakest as of now, as their ability to carry out attacks, their leadership, their funding has largely been restricted and constrained thanks to these anti Naxal operations. So now the government is pushing the remaining Naxals to surrender. See, India has always believed that when we deal with local insurgencies, be it Northeast insurgency, be it Naxals or insurgents in Kashmir, we always have to be open to negotiations and have a surrender policy because eventually they are our own citizens. You can't fight such wars till the death. You can't hope to eliminate everyone to end the security threat. That wouldn't be the right approach. It could even be an approach which could backfire. India has always shown that willingness to talk to insurgents. We've negotiated with Northeast insurgents. We've had surrender policy in Kashmir. So we have a surrender policy for Naxals as well. States have their own individual surrender policies to bring the Naxals back into mainstream. So recently, Home Minister Amit Shah urged Naxals to surrender as they are losing this war. Given that Indian forces have stepped up the fight and weakened the Naxal groups in different parts of the country, Amit Shah pushed Naxals to surrender, and the same statement was reiterated by leaders from Chhattisgarh as well. So, in return, following these statements made by Indian leaders, Maoists have issued a formal statement. One of the regional cadre group of Maoists in Chhattisgarh, they have released a formal letter stating that surrender policy is not a complete solution for Maoism, meaning they have refused to surrender. They've also said surrendering is not a final solution to their problem. If you trace the roots of Naxalism, it largely emerged because of the divide present in the country, the developmental divide essentially. The landless peasants, the farmers, the tribal communities, which felt disadvantaged, which felt targeted, oppressed, and discriminated, they were exploited by the Maoists, indoctrinated with the Naxal ideology. So, without addressing the root problems, the root causes, Naxalism can't be brought, it just can't be eradicated without addressing the developmental issues. Of course, India has done a lot in the last 3 decades in particular, starting especially from early 2000. India has done a remarkable task at improving administration, local governance in the Naxal hit areas. By improving local governance, we have delivered the benefits of development even to the Naxal hinterland. And number of Naxal dominated areas have been liberated. They have been brought back fully under administrative control of the concerned governments. But there are still few pockets where Naxals have a strong hold, especially in the Chhattisgarh Odisha belt. But the very fact that Naxals are even thinking about surrender and issuing a statement about that, it's a sign, it's a clear sign that Naxals are on the back foot. The letter, if you go through the details of this letter, shows the weakness of the Naxals right now. They've been pushed on the back foot due to the stepped up anti Naxal operations, but still they're refusing to surrender. They are appearing to indicate that they might consider surrender as a policy if they end the anti Naxal operations and if they create a lucrative, peaceful environment. Essentially, they want the ongoing anti Naxal operations to stop. But government officials and government leaders have denied that because the Deputy CM of Chhattisgarh has stated that anti Naxal operations cannot stop. Given the security threat posed by Naxals, the security operations will continue, but there is an olive branch extended by the government. There is a surrender policy in place. In fact, Naxals, if they surrender, they even get an incentive. They'll be rehabilitated by the government. The government will give them a compensation, encourage them to lay down their arms. So the government is pushing Naxals to take up this offer, but Naxals appear to reject it. Though they are open to the idea, it shows that they are on the weaker foot. They are rejecting it as of now because they want the operations to end. So this is a clear indicator. That's why I feel this article is important. The article is a sign that Naxalism has taken a big hit. This letter has been brought out by one of the sub-cadre groups of CPI Maoist. Now, what is the CPI Maoist? The CPI Maoist is a primary Naxal group in the country that was formed in 2004 by merging two major Maoist groups, the MCCI and PWG. The People's War Group, which was centered around Andhra Pradesh and Odisha, and the Maoist Communist Center of India, MCCI, which was centered around West Bengal, Bihar belt. These two Naxal groups merged in 2004 to form CPI Maoist, which revived Naxalism in the country. In fact, by early 2000, India had weakened these two branches of Maoism through security operations. But they united by forming a strategic alliance in 2004, and CPI Maoist became the biggest internal threat for India. In fact, it is designated as a terrorist organization under the provisions of UAPA, under Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. So today, CPI Maoist has suffered severe losses thanks to the anti-Naxal operations led by the center with support of the state governments, and they're pushing the Maoists to surrender, but the Maoists are trying to hold back. But the signs are very clear that Naxalism is on the back foot, and you never know. There is a possibility that maybe in the next few years, it could be possible to eradicate Naxalism, or at least bring down the extent of Naxal activities. Or you might even see a revival, because Naxals in the past have shown such strength to revive from the brink as well. So, with this, we end our detailed analysis of all the important articles. Now, let's take a quick look at the prelims articles and close the session for today. On page 11, the Hindu carries this image of this sport in Tamil Nadu. This sport, which is depicted in the image here, is called the Rekla race. It is another bull sport. You might have heard of Jallikattu, which is celebrated in Tamil Nadu during the Pongal festival, which is again a harvest festival related to agricultural seasons. Similarly, during this season, the Rekla race is carried out. Now, what is the uniqueness of Rekla race? In Rekla race, as you can see, the bulls, especially the ones which are fit for running, they are tethered together. A pair of bulls are tethered together to a bullock cart, and two men will ride the bullock cart, and they compete in a race with other carts. This is the Rekla race, which is similar to Jallikattu. Jallikattu might be slightly different because there's no cart attached, or the riders don't ride the bull. They try to catch the bull in Jallikattu. But the usage of bulls in a sporting festival, which is related to agricultural harvest season, is the similarity between the two. So this is a very popular sport in Tamil Nadu, which is celebrated around the Coimbatore and the Madurai region. So that is something you need to know about. Next, VDEM, which is a think tank based out of Sweden, has published its Democracy Report 2025. VDEM focuses on the nature of democracies around the world and brings out this popular but controversial report called the Democracy Report. So the latest democracy report for 2025 has been published, and according to the VDEM report, liberal democracies are on the decline, whereas closed autocracies are on the increase. See, this think tank, this research institute, it categorizes democracies into four types. It has developed an index by using various parameters, including political participation, freedom of press, etc. Various parameters are used on which countries are gauged, and finally, they are categorized into these four groups: liberal democracy, electoral autocracy, and closed autocracy. Liberal democracy is where democracy is fully functional, where the free rights of the people are protected. Electoral democracy sees regular elections with democratic rights being upheld and protected, whereas electoral autocracy is where elections are held, but for every other aspect, it's an autocracy where freedom of speech, fundamental rights are curbed and restricted by the state. A closed autocracy is essentially a dictatorship. So, according to VDEM's analysis, over the last few decades, we are seeing a decline in liberal democracy. Liberal democracies are reducing. You can see that over here, whereas closed autocracies are increasing. Electoral autocracies also have seen a jump. In fact, VDEM attracted a big controversy when it labeled India an electoral autocracy. Recently, it downgraded India's status to an electoral autocracy, and since then, it has kept India in this group. It has raised concern about deteriorating democratic culture in India, and obviously, the report has been rejected by the government of India. The Indian government rejects the VDEM report as biased and manipulative. But you also need to note that on the Press Freedom Index, which is published by Reporters Sans Frontiers, RSF, our ranking with regard to freedom of press has also declined significantly. India ranks 159 out of 180 countries according to the 2024 Press Freedom Index. The last time we were in the top 100 was in 2002. Since 2022, India's ranking has dropped below 150. It points out the threats and concerns for the press, for free press in the country. But again, India rejects this report as well, pointing out that this is an act of Western interference and a biased outlook at India's democracy and India's freedom of press. Next, on page 13, we have a very important article that pays tribute to a great man who was born on this day, on April 11th. You can see the image of this person over here. This is none other than Mahatma Jyotirao Phule. Mahatma Jyotirao Phule was born on April 11th, was indeed one of India's greatest social reformer, along with his wife, Savitribai Phule. Now, I urge you to read this article later. I will give you some basic facts about Jyotirao Phule, which is needed for prelims, but later, please read this article in detail. It provides some interesting, beautiful anecdotes about the role and contribution of Jyotirao Phule in fighting the caste discrimination in our country, in breaking the chains of casteism in India. Jyotirao Phule, born in 1827, was one of the leading anti-caste social reformers, known for championing the fight against untouchability with his wife Savitribai Phule. They championed education, particularly girl child education. They were the pioneers of women education in the country, and they established the first all girls school in Pune in 1848. They also established Satya Shodhak Samaj, allowing equal participation for people of all castes, all religion, irrespective of their caste and religion, encouraging the oppressed classes to step out, break the social barriers, and fight against their oppression from the upper caste and seek their upliftment. It's because of this incredible work that Jyotirao Phule was accorded the honorary title of Mahatma. So please read this article in detail when you find some time. It actually gives you some interesting anecdotes. The last article for today related to a government scheme, PM-POSHAN. PM-POSHAN is a crucial program for delivering nutritious meals to our school going children in government schools and in aided schools. It's a centrally sponsored scheme where the government lifts food grains from Food Corporation of India, from the depots of the FCI. It takes the entire subsidy which is offered to the procurement of these food grains. It bears the entire transport cost as well, from the FCI godowns to schools around the country. And through these food grains, the government delivers a minimum requirement of pulses, food grains, and vegetables to school children from class 1 to class 8. Almost 11 crore students in the country rely on this program for a hot, nutritious meal. From class 1 to class 8 during the school days, they get a hot cooked meal in their school depending on their nutritional requirement. It is obviously slightly lower for primary school students, slightly higher for upper primary school students. Now it's in news because the government has decided to increase the allocation for PM Poshan, because to account for inflation. Food inflation, of course, has affected the prices of pulses, vegetables, and food grains. So, to ensure that the availability of essential food items is not compromised for the program, government has stepped up the allocation, and it will incur an additional cost of 954 crores, along with the current expenses it is incurring in running this critical scheme. This not only delivers basic nutrition to our school going children, but encourages them to participate in school, to remain in school. Studies have established that the midday meal program has been critical in bringing students to school and retaining them in the schooling system. So that is what we learn from this important article. On this note, I bring my detailed analysis and discussion to an end. I hope you guys have liked and understood everything. If you did, please let me know in the comments, press the like button, share the video with other aspirants, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.